right, Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you, and welcome to this episode
4.
of Tarjuman. And today I'll be talking about the thought of Alfred North Whitehead, or as I'm lovingly starting to call him, Sha'ib al-Ratsilillahi, the white-haired divine, as the Islamic philosophers of the past often referred to Plato, Aflatun lillahi. And his form of Neoplatonism. And to help me understand some of that today is Professor Matt Segall. You're most welcome, Professor Segall.
Great to be here. Yeah, always happy to talk Whitehead
And
and Neoplatonism.
great. And Matt Segall is an assistant professor of philosophy and religion at the California Institute of Integral Studies. He teaches courses on German idealism and process philosophy, which is the type of philosophy that Whitehead founded, in a sense, for the philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness program at that institute. He blogs regularly at footnotes to Plato, footnotes to number 2 Plato.com, and you also have a YouTube channel as well. Yes.
Yep, that's right. Footnotes to Plato as well. Mm-hmm.
Great. And so I had you on here today, since you've been kind of my window into Whitehead, and I'm curious to hear how you've been developing that thought as well. And I kind of wanted to just briefly start setting up why I got interested in Whitehead and why I think a lot of the listeners might be as well. Just so I'm a convert to Islam from 2007. And I, like most people, I think like a lot of people in the society, I end up having this kind of divided brain of the sort of secular enlightenment, as in European Enlightenment, sort of thinking and education system, etc. And then also having spiritual practices that I'm involved in, and just for a long time in my life having a difficulty with those not seeming to integrate very well, or seeming that feeling that having difficulty with integrating those in a serious way.
Sure.
And when I came across the thought of Whitehead, I sort of had some, I saw some parallels to my own thinking in a certain way. So for instance, I had always had the experience that certainly science would overturn certain myths about religion, et cetera, help clarify things. It was certainly giving me access to better understandings, better realities in a lot of ways. But I often felt that the scientific epistemology was a bit oversold. And so it would leave me wanting more. I would leave me wanting, but math is still presuming consciousness and stuff like that. When I heard, and then, for instance, when I heard of Neoplatonic philosophy for the first time, although in my case it was through thinkers like Suhrawardi and Ibn Arabi, who are Neoplatonic Sufi philosophers, basically, where they have this kind of idea of, God is the only reality, and things are sort of, to put a very long story short, we'll just say, are emanating from him, or everything is the unfolding of the divine reality. Before this, it's actually kind of timely that I'm having you on now, because I'm planning an episode on divine unity, which I'll be releasing actually before this episode. So that will set up some of these ideas for the listeners a little bit, so they'll be hopefully a little bit more prepared to deal with this. And so once I heard of the Neoplatonic philosophers, I was like, this is the most coherent description of reality I've ever heard of. And then everywhere I looked, I would look at Aristotelian style philosophers like Al-Farabi, and I wrote this paper about basically how if you take this Aristotelian philosophy to its conclusion, it ends up being Neoplatonism. Like, you kind of find the Neoplatonism sort of inchoate, or whatever the word is. It's like, if you take any sort of coherent system of thought that's trying to describe the universe, and kind of like push it to its limit, you start to see it turn into some sort of Neoplatonic thought, which is that was kind of why I was so convinced that Neoplatonism was sort of onto something. And I should say that Neoplatonic thought has been incorporated into Islamic philosophy, et cetera, for a long time. It's very, there's been, it's very easily integratable with like the Quran and things like that in a lot of ways. So I was very intrigued when I heard about Whitehead and his project of Principia Mathematica, which was this attempt with him and Bertrand Russell to really ground mathematics in logic. Sometimes I like to push back against STEM people. How the STEM people say that they'll say, biology is applied chemistry, and chemistry is applied physics, and physics is applied mathematics. And then I would say, well, okay, mathematics is applied logic, and logic is applied philosophy. But anyway,
I like that.
So Whitehead was really trying to do that essentially, right? And I was wondering, can you characterize? I mean, granted, we're not logicians and mathematicians, and I don't know how I don't know how trained you are in that aspect of it. But are there any sort of logical arguments or what have you that you could characterize for us from that volume and kind of how it impacted Whitehead?
Yeah, that's a great place to start with Whitehead. And it's a fascinating story, and interpretations of, let's call it the Principia project, differ. On the one hand, some would say it kind of founded the whole analytic approach to philosophy, and some would say that it set this new standard for logical analysis that eventually led to it provided the tools that were required for the computer age to begin, and really understanding how you would need to program a machine to do more advanced reasoning and so on. But other people would say that actually this project was a total failure. They didn't succeed in grounding mathematics in clear logical axioms and principles. Russell was kind of traumatized by this failure. I mean, it wasn't later formally proven that they couldn't complete the project as designed until Gödel's incompleteness theorems in the 30s. But already before that, as they were trying to just logically justify or prove that 1 + 1 does indeed equal 2, as it turns out, there are a lot of steps sort of nested into a very simple arithmetical statement like that. And they developed a series of logical axioms and deductions to get from, what even is a number. And
sorry, we have a child intrusion. One second.
No worries.
Okay.
Yeah, like
sorry,
what is
there's a lot of steps going on in the there were a lot of steps going on in
like even to define what a number is,
right,
using set theory. And Russell had and Whitehead had to develop a series of logical fixes to deal with paradoxes that arise based on their definitions of a number. They were already aware of the difficulty of self-reference and so on, which Gödel would later point out as a problem for any attempt to create a complete system in symbolic logic. And so by the end of it, Russell was like, my search for certainty in mathematics and logic was foiled and just fell to pieces, and all I was left with was this nest of paradoxes and confusions, right? And so Russell was really traumatized by this failure. Whitehead, on the other hand, was kind of liberated and wasn't as committed to this idea that mathematics could be entirely formalized.
And by formalized, you mean kind of like stated in an irrefutable sort of step-by-step process, right?
Exactly. And he started to realize he never fully let go of this perspective, but he figured we'll push the formalist project as far as it'll go. But he saw how mathematics has this irreducibly intuitive dimension to it And the formalist school, or the logicist school, sometimes it's called, wanted to eliminate this intuitive dimension because there seems to be too much room for mistakes, and there's a gap there where a mathematician can leap to the solution and then has to go back and prove it. And that was uncomfortable for some people who had more of a mentality like Russell's. Whereas Whitehead was like, well, maybe mathematics is more about pattern recognition, which is always going to have this intuitive dimension, where you're always going to be feeling your way ahead of what your rational mind can comprehend, right?
Right.
And you can go back
you have the formal statements about how to do it, but at the end of the day, like when we actually do math, a lot of it is sort of like it's obvious to us in a certain fundamental way, and that is something that makes it difficult to make AI, for instance, because how do you make the same things obvious to a machine that are obvious to us?
Right.
And it resembles. It seems like I'm influenced a lot by John Vervaeke's work. Talking about there seems to be some sort of kind of like skill aspect to it, in the sense of like, well, in the same way I can move my two arms, I can mentally move two objects or two mental objects, and kind of imagine based on my sort of the way I'm used to interacting with space and objects, et cetera, kind of intuitively do things.
So much is implicit and contextual in human modes of apprehension. And it's even more well understood today that trying to put into language, digital code, or any sort of symbolic language, all of the steps involved in the simplest human cognitive acts is damn near impossible, because there's just so much that we do implicitly, right? That's not based on a set of rules that we could spell out, right? And computers, if they don't know the rules, they don't know what the hell you're talking about.
Right. Yeah, they'll start glitching like we know computers do. There's a sense in which, while I certainly don't, I think it's very possible that we could eventually develop AI that does what humans do. And I think that's kind of like frightening for a lot of people, especially, religious people, I think, tend to be sort of disturbed by that, because then it's like, oh, well, if you can make that, then we're machines. And I would kind of say like, well, if you just made something that's like a human being, why wouldn't you just say you just made a human being of some sort? Instead of saying, oh, well, we must be machines, whatever that AI does, if it eventually does maintain consciousness, it's certainly a lot different from a toaster or something. If it's, it's more similar to us than it is to a toaster. So what are you really worried about?
Yeah.
Obviously there's other, social, historical, political questions that will probably be could be big problems. But I guess philosophically and spiritually, just from the idea of it, I guess, is what I'm saying, is not too disturbing.
I think there's obviously no upper bound on the cleverness of artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms, whether or not, at least on the platforms that I know of and can imagine that are available, I don't think that we're going to ever be dealing with conscious machines. I think we will be dealing with machines, and with robotics becoming ever more lifelike and capable, we will be dealing with machines that can easily trick us into imagining that they are conscious. And we, as human beings, become more and more embedded within these electronic systems of communication and control. We're being changed by that media environment that we're more situated within, that we increasingly live within. And so we become a bit more machine-like, and kind of lower our standards, and the machines are getting more human-like. And so it's almost like we're going to meet in the middle somewhere. But I think this is more of a, there's a lot of projection going on, and some people want the machines to be conscious. And I do. I mean, there's all sorts of interesting ethical, political
Yeah.
questions to raise in this context, but I'm skeptical that a digital computer or anything running on algorithms could ever be actually conscious. It could appear to be. It could be mimicking the behaviors we associate with consciousness. But is there a point of view there? I'm not sure. But that's not to say there couldn't be a kind of cyborg biotechnological interface where you're dealing with some kind of organism that also has, digital technologies, microchips and processors sort of woven into it. But there is, I think there's the biological basis of what we think of as consciousness and sentience. I think there's good reasons to think that can't be mimicked totally, like on silicon with digital code. I think that's kind of a category mistake, but obviously there are other possibilities there for bringing mind and machine together.
I guess kind of maybe one sort of likely synthesis of the two ideas that seems likely to me, or plausible to me, is like that. So maybe the consciousness of an AI might not quite be the same as us, but it could be analogous in certain ways. Just like I feel, of course, the consciousness of various animals is certainly different from us, but overlapping in certain ways, and has a lot of analogies and what have you. But anyhow, I didn't want to get we shouldn't get too sidetracked on the AI question. I wanted to get back into the philosophy aspect of things. And I wanted to just test my understanding of Gödel's incompleteness theorem, because I've noticed there's a lot of kind of, I sometimes see it treated very sloppily, where people will take it and then be like, and so magic is possible, where, and so I kind of, from my understanding, to put it in layman's terms, Gödel's incompleteness theorem is basically that a system can't, whatever system you set up to describe something, or maybe not even describe, but whatever system you set up, as in a set of entities that can interact and what have you, it cannot inherently justify itself. There always has to be some sort of, like it's sort of logically contradictory to have an enclosed system that somehow it can't be coherent and enclosed and somehow also justify itself on the one hand. And then on the other hand, if any self-reference is possible within the system, then you'll never be able to sort of indefinitely predict or simplify its behavior into what you set it up as. So it'll complexify, it'll interact, and eventually sort of, new rules, you could say, will arise on top of the old rules. And so it will, when I say transcend itself, again, I think that's often a term that gets used very sloppily as well. Transcend here, at least in the way I'm using it, is, it's becoming something new that could not be understood using the rules from which it was built. And so, and there's some good videos, and I'll definitely put some links in the videos to, like, I think, Veritasium has a great explanation of the Gödel's incompleteness theorem, and such. But I guess, does that sound right to you, or did you want to add anything to that understanding of the Gödel's incompleteness theorem?
No, I think that's right. It's just basically this realization by Gödel and this formal proof that you can't have a complete system that doesn't produce statements that contradict it. And and so either, and this is the lesson Whitehead took from Gödel, is like, don't try to close your system, keep it open, and just acknowledge that you're constantly going to be needing to include new categories. And so, in other words, rather than thinking that you could arrive at a totally self-contained, autonomous logical system that's fully consistent internally, just recognize that logic is a tool, and that it's embedded in this more intuitive mode of reasoning that we call human consciousness. And we can do a lot with formal logic and systematic thinking, but that it's not how creativity works. Creativity always will burst through the bounds of system. I mean, this is Whitehead's lesson, but as you described Gödel's incompleteness theorem, it's just that you can't have a complete and consistent formal system. It just doesn't work. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, because it can't justify its own existence, right? Is that kind of one of the main grinds?
Not only that, but it will produce self-referential statements that are self-contradictory or paradoxical.
Right. So it breaks at both ends. It breaks at both ends, basically. Which is why, and this is something I'll definitely be addressing to some extent in the episode before this. I'll be discussing kind of like nominalism versus Platonism, I suppose. And nominalism, I see a lot, like, it strikes me as pretty incoherent in a lot of ways. One of the main problems seems to be that and sort of, to get rid of the jargon here, people who are trained in the sciences and the way of thinking about how the universe works that's very popular, obviously has its uses. And it's discovered great things and uncovered great truths and all sorts of things. So I'm not calling it an invalid form of knowledge or anything like that. But the one of the issues, or people, when trying to find a fundamental cosmology theory of everything, something like that, they often presume that there must be some sort of fundamental particle or fundamental set of entities that are the system, which then interacts to create the universe. And I guess I wonder if that's even possible. Really, is that a possible? Let's just leave it at that. Do you think that's possible?
Science is in the business of building models, and models are always going to be some version of what you're describing, and science becomes scientism when it forgets that it's built a model, and that models are always false, right? And some models are better at making predictions than others. And so science can advance in the sense that its models are more inclusive of new data and so on. But at the end of the day, just because we have a working model does not mean we understand the universe as such, because the model is going to be based on a set of assumptions about what the fundamental parts are, and is trying to assemble a whole out of parts. But the universe, and this is a kind of fundamental Platonic insight, the universe is made of wholes. It's not made of parts. Nominalism is, there's so many different implications for nominalism just in metaphysics, but then it bleeds into culture and in ways that I find destructive. But in this case, nominalism is relevant because it tends to imagine that the universe could be assembled purely out of particulars, and that universals are just names that we generalize from similar particulars or something. Experience of similar particulars. And that, first of all, doesn't give you a basis for mathematics. And so if you're a physicist who wants to use mathematics in your modeling, and you're presupposing nominalism, you're kind of trying to have your cake and eat it too, as it were. Like you're trying to use tools that shouldn't be possible in this type of universe that you're claiming to describe. So we just have to be careful not to take our models, mistake them for reality. Right. Yeah. Because I've been working on, like I said, this episode on divine unity, and sort of finding, so if you presume nominalism, meaning, that there are no, like, patterns are not real, what only exists are the things themselves, you could say. That's how I think nominalists would think of it. But to me, it's kind of like, well, even to pick out something as a particular thing in contrast to other things and compare them or anything, that's already that's already a pattern. Atoms are made, even if so atoms are made up of little particles. There are patterns. It's something, it's a pattern that more fundamental, quote unquote, or smaller things are participating in.
And so, already even with an atom, you're dealing with a very obvious thing that's a pattern. Uh, and then even if you could find some sort of fundamental particle, which again is highly philosophically questionable, like can you really have an epistemological like bottom of the well per se,
Mhm.
if that's even possible, I think you would still need to have you would still need to be like, this is a thing that's different from these other things. And so it rests on this, nominalism seems to rest on this assumption that there are some things that are obviously real and other things that are not, or something. And then, but I just find that completely unfounded. And what the weird thing is that, say, if you take nominalism to its ultimate conclusion, sort of that there's that you can't say anything or distinguish anything or compare anything. It's just, here's reality, sort of, almost. Which
Mhm.
then it almost leaves you with this unspeakable monad, just like Neoplatonism. And then to me, it's like, if we're going to do useful pattern finding, maybe like as a Neoplatonist I'll kind of agree, like, okay, patterns aren't ultimately real. In some, there's layers of reality. They're not ultimately real, but if we're going to build useful patterns and it's possible for us to detect those patterns, they must be there somehow. And it makes a lot more sense to, uh, um, if there were no patterns and everything were, uh, um, completely disconnected, completely atomized, incommensurable, how would it be even possible for us to detect patterns? Whereas if you think of it as the monad, everything, the unspeakable one is the ultimate reality, then the particulars are abstracted out of that. That seems a lot more plausible to me. Abstracting, like just like how we abstract dimensions out of three-dimensional space. Like to think of space as three dimensions is like, it's like, I don't know, is that really, I've never seen a graph at the middle of the universe. I've never seen the XYZ axis at the center of the universe. Like that seems a little, it's certainly an abstraction, it's a useful one, et cetera, et cetera. But,
Mhm.
to me, it seems like it's a lot more plausible that, given that we can detect patterns that are clearly real in some sense, because, there's a difference between, getting hit by a car and not getting hit by a car, because those are real in some sense, the plausible way for that to happen must be that they're there as part of the one, and we're abstracting particulars out of it rather than the opposite, like you said. So does
Mhm.
that, I don't does that resonate with what you've been thinking? And I guess, have you been what sort of let's just leave it at that for the moment.
I think there's no more primordial problem in philosophy than the relationship between the one and the many.
Mm-hmm.
And the one, or the monad, is the sort of originating insight of the Platonic, Pythagorean schools. But there's also, I think, an important move that we can make to integrate this intuition of the monad, of the one, with a kind of monadology, which is something Leibniz initiates in like the late 1600s, early 1700s, when he wrote his text, The Monadology. And Whitehead picks up on Leibniz's effort here, where in some sense the physical universe is made of perspectives. And so in Leibniz's scheme, each monad contains the entire universe sort of holographically within itself.
Which let me ask you one thing. There is that, like, a lot of prominent physicists have started talking about the universe as being holographic now, but I don't think they mean it in this way. Am I correct in that? Are you familiar with this? Like, Leonard
Yeah,
Susskind,
right.
um, like, as far as I
I,
understand, he means in the sense of, volume information for a 3D space being present on a 2D space, sort of. But I don't
mhm.
know. Is there anything more Neoplatonic in what he's talking about?
I don't think for him, no. I think for him, it has more to do with like information compression and thinking of the universe
Mm-hmm.
as some kind of computational process. And
Okay.
again, that's a model. And as long as we
Right.
understand it as a model, it could provide some valuable insight.
Mhm.
I don't think of like Leibniz is doing metaphysics. He's not doing
Mhm.
physics. Metaphysics is not the same as like coming up with a model of the world. It's more, it's trying to get at a more primordial level than that. That would, because whenever you're creating a model of something, you're already presupposing a kind of dualism between you as an observer who's imagining this
Mhm.
system that would be operating independent of you. And
Mhm.
when you're doing metaphysics, you can't make that assumption that you're an
Mhm.
observer separate from the system, right?
Right.
Metaphysicians are trying to incorporate um, their own conscious participation in the universe into their understanding of the universe, and so Leibniz's monads are like little souls, and so he's trying to embed mind in the world rather than the typical physicist modeling things who has taken mind out of the world before they even started to model, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So metaphysics is a layer deeper, I would say, than what Susskind or other physicists are doing. But the holographic metaphor works to understand Leibniz's view. Whitehead advances on Leibniz because Whitehead describes a universe composed of what he calls actual occasions of experience. They're
Mhm.
like monads in that they're mirroring the whole universe internally, but Whitehead opens his monads, whereas Leibniz said his monads are windowless, which is to say that in some
Mhm.
sense, God has created this pre-established harmony, and the infinite monads that make up the physical world um, have pre-programmed mental representations that will unfold so as to make it seem as though there's causal relationships unfolding between the monads, but really it's just each monad running its divinely ordained consciousness program, to use
Mhm.
computational language.
Mhm.
And there's no real freedom, there's no real causal influence between the monads. It's just a pre-established harmony.
Mhm.
Whitehead's not happy with that. He wants his monads to have some freedom.
Mhm.
And so they're open to one another, and real causal influences are being shared.
Okay. Oh, so he uses the term monad for like for
Actual
what do you call it?
occasions.
Actual occasions. Okay.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry. I may have I was using I guess I was using it in the Pythagorean sense or what have you of like the one thing that exists.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess. Oh,
There's
okay. Okay. Just
monad,
to make
and
sure.
then
Yeah.
monadology would be more like monism would be the reference to the one monad, and then
Okay.
Leibniz has this text called the Monadology, which is a
Okay.
pluralistic scheme. But the monism and the pluralism are not meant
Uh-huh.
to be opposites that can't be reconciled. The hope is that because each of the many contains the one, that you're able to integrate this coincidence of opposites in some way. And that, if the one is truly infinite, then it would manifest as many which contain itself. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm.
so the one would not be, if infinite, would not be limited in such a way that it would avoid becoming many, if you follow, that the many would be in some sense the natural expression of an infinite one, because
Okay.
each of the many includes the one, and Whitehead's adding this creative dimension to it so that the universe is never the same twice. So there is
Mm-hmm.
oneness, but it's always growing, it's always evolving, and it's not a
Mm-hmm.
static eternal whole, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's caught up in a creative advance, and this is where his whole process theology comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And so Whitehead's this attempt to carry forward the Platonist insight into eternal perfection and integrate that with this more modern understanding of an evolutionary cosmos and of a
Mm-hmm.
process of creativity that's unfolding. And some people, like I've spoken to some perennialist philosophers and Neoplatonists who are unhappy with the extent to which Whitehead leans into the direction of an evolutionary view of the universe and of the divine, because they think, how could something eternal evolve? That doesn't make any sense,
Mm-hmm.
right? But Whitehead's
Mm-hmm.
trying to integrate these views.
Yeah, no, I like because that seems like a very there's certainly some I get a little Salafi, a little bit that's a term for like a certain type of Muslim that they're very suspicious of like outward or like non-Islamic quote unquote systems of thought or whatever. So
Mhm.
when it comes to that idea of like God is this like eternal unchanging thing or what have you, then like yeah, that's where I get a little selfie. I'm like, that's like a Greek concept that like why would we need that, you know?
Right.
Um and yeah, for sure. So I guess so Leibniz had monads and he didn't want causal interaction between them. Why? I guess I didn't quite follow that.
Um, because that would lead to too much contingency, and he wanted to
Okay.
understand
Mhm.
how we could have an ordered universe
Right.
that
Yeah, because there is this
consists.
very
Yeah,
kind of paradoxical sense in which, of course, like everything in a sense is very contingent. Like I could do this and I could do this, but at the same time, like when you sort of accept the contingency of everything, that almost like forms a new ground upon which then it's like everything's eternally decreed. I find
yeah.
myself sort of going through this oscillation of it, which
Well,
is probably. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
well, just part of the context here for these early modern thinkers, you have the scientific revolution and Newton's description mathematically of the movement of the heavenly bodies, and
Mhm.
it's more precise than anyone ever imagined the human mind could achieve in terms of making
Mhm.
predictions about the motions of heavenly bodies, which Newton's also canceled the distinction between the terrestrial and the celestial, so that the same laws
Mhm.
apply in both places. And so this idea of laws of nature is very much in the air. And
Mhm.
Leibniz wants to do justice to the idea of law. And so the idea that the monads with minds, like every monad is a mind and a body in some sense. It has
Mhm.
an inside and an outside. But how could you reconcile the freedom of minds with the determinism of physical bodies, which Newton has, and I mean, Leibniz independently invents the calculus too. And so he's very aware of the mathematical lawfulness of the natural order. How do you reconcile those two? And his attempt to reconcile the inner freedom of mind with the external determinism of matter is to make the monads windowless. And so
Okay.
God sets it all in order in advance. The laws are in place. What we experience as freedom is really destiny, right?
Huh. Uh-huh.
So Whitehead doesn't think the physics has changed by Whitehead's time, and there's a recognition by him at least, and other physicists. Lee Smolin recognizes this. Laws of physics are really habits. They're
Mhm.
habits of nature that are widespread and pretty consistent, but they're not necessary, right? They
Yeah.
change
Yeah.
gradually over the course of time.
Yeah. Whitehead's idea of the sort of the different layers of habit building up and building on top of each other as, like gravitational habits or,
Mhm.
who knows, maybe it's just, our patch of the universe or our patch of this time period or whatever it is. Like, at least we know locally, like, yeah, gravity seems to be acting pretty consistently and photons are acting pretty consistently. And then based on that, new things arise,
Right.
utilizing or exploiting that regularity, just in the way,
Exactly.
plants need a regular source of rainwater in
Mhm.
order to live. Physical objects take advantage of these certain symmetries, as I think they would call it in physics,
Mhm.
that have that we I mean we can't logically prove that they're necessary. How would you Gödel's incompleteness theorem? How would you
Right.
possibly prove that light has to be this speed or something like that? And even the concept of a speed is a very contingent, sort of dependent thing. So like, yeah,
Relative.
there's certain
Yeah.
habits, contingent habits and what have you that have built up, and then we as creatures are then able to emerge in that
Mhm.
uh, that
Yeah.
that
So
that
Whitehead has
environment.
this category of society that he applies beyond just the human level. And
Hmm.
so but at the human level, we talk in a way that's very easy to understand about laws being created as a social act. Like we agree on the
Hmm. Hmm.
laws and they're
Yes.
in place. The same analogy holds in the physical world. Like hydrogen and helium atoms in some non-conscious way, just by virtue of their, like, the statistical activity of large numbers of them, have agreed
Hmm.
on the law of gravitation as it is now. But each
Yeah.
hydrogen atom is kind of, has its own vote. And as the universe continues to evolve, that agreement might shift somewhat, such that it, the law of gravitation behaves in new ways in different circumstances and different environments and so on. So
yeah. So I really love this sort of this extension of, like, on the one hand, yeah, of course, we don't want to naively assume that all creatures and beings and entities in the universe act just like us. But I think it makes perfect sense that there should be analogies, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with. Have you ever listened to the podcast "Fight Like an Animal" by I think it's Arnold. I'm not remembering his name, but maybe I'll probably link that in the description. He has this fantastic kind of discussion of, he looks at the intersection of, I guess, anthropology and human, essentially like biological anthropology and politics. And it naturally kind of goes into discussions about animals and things like that. And he's getting you to realize that, like chimpanzees have politics, within their, of course, they're not, their brains are not the same as ours or what have you, but they have some analogy to politics where they're maneuvering. They're, this guy's a bully. Let's get some friends together and overthrow him. And, there's conservative thinkers often will make this appeal to, like, well, look at all these animals are hierarchical. And so it must be biological. So why not even bother, or why bother resisting our biology? As if it's this inevitable, like, humans have had tribal structures all our history, so we should just embrace it and just not even try to, like, fight against the negative aspects of that or something. And when you look at, like, you have chimpanzees, which are, generally characterized as more aggressive and less, I guess, they're not as good at, like, avoiding fights as Homo sapiens, but the typical chimpanzees. But then you look at bonobo chimps, which are, again, genetically negligibly different from regular. They're just like a different group of chimpanzees, and their behavior is totally different and extremely egalitarian and everything. So he was talking about how you can see that as basically a political movement that won in some development of chimpanzees, and they established a new subspecies or whatever, or, just like today's ethnic groups are yesterday's social movements. Today's species are yesterday's subspecies, and yesterday's subspecies were the same species as the day before. You know what I'm saying? These, like, there's just these levels of evolution, and it's never deterministic. There's always this kind of aspect of, if you see politics happening among chimpanzees, why not amongst, and of course you see other herd animals and all these other sorts of things. Why wouldn't you see it elsewhere? Which, this this actually leads me to an important question that I wanted to get kind of your thoughts on, is, like, to what, like, could you shed some light based on, Whitehead and your own thinking, when we think about other things other than us having certainly analogous traits to us, maybe, of course, everything has a information feedback loop. Maybe it's not as detailed, you could say, as, like, our information feedback loop in the sense of consciousness, or what, to speak very, very generally for a moment. But in order for consciousness to arise, it seems like there must be some sort of inchoate potential thing that just needs to be developed, in the same way that, like, whales, had legs at some point and they just weren't using them, and now, there's legs are left in the skeleton. Or bats have wings that are pretty similar. They share an ancestor with our hands that they've sort of taken on in a new form. So it's not that they made the wings out of nothing. We go back to, we're sort of evolutionary cousins of everything in the universe, in a sense. And I would point to, there's a verse of the Quran which says, it refers to fitratullah, the primordial nature of God, upon which mankind was planted or seeded. Usually,
like the Imago Dei kind of idea.
Kind of, yeah. Well, there are hadith, there are, like, sayings of the Prophet that say almost exactly the same thing as the Bible, as far as the Adam was created upon the the form or the
image and likeness and
the image or form of God. And then but the fitra statement almost seems to me like an almost deeper statement of not only is there this form similarity in some sense, of course we don't think it's literal, but fitra, that root has to do with kind of like it's used for things that are started but not yet developed. So like fatira is like a unleavened dough that needs to rise or what have you, in
nice.
some uses of the word. And so I guess I haven't heard this corroborated by other exegetes, but my interpretation, and Allahu alam, God only knows best, my interpretation of this verse is that it's sort of saying that like the primordial nature of God is the same sort of root upon which humans have grown out of, and which it seems like a kind of almost deeper version of this, like being created on the image of God. So one question I have is that given all these analogies and similarities, and the question of how like we say, okay, a rock doesn't think, right? Or but there's maybe something analogous going on with the rock. At the same time, the reason I run into a problem with trying to differentiate consciousness, because usually when we differentiate things, it's sort of based on this like, well, if I have a mirror, I can clearly, if I look at a mirror, I can clearly see the tree across the street. So like that's what makes the mirror different from me, even though we're both getting hit by photons from the tree across the street. The mirror is reflecting them in a very clear way that I can see it. Whereas, you could look at my chest, you don't see the stuff reflected on me. Maybe if I was wearing, shiny glasses or something, but you're not seeing. So it's like we're all taking in this information and then reflecting it out. But what comes out is sort of, or what comes out clearly is dependent on what we are. And so because of that, because it seems kind of, but again, I'm making that judgment about, the reason the mirror looks different from a non-reflective object, quote unquote, is because of my visual apparatus. Right. So like, I find difficulty in really, non-subjectively or non-transjectively or something, defining, differentiating us from other things in a way that's not just an appeal to our own perspective on it. Because you see, so like for instance, when you look at, so emergence, emergence is dependent on, maybe a certain level of entropy, kind of, entropy as in there's a lot of complexity that at a certain point becomes sort of uninteresting or regular in some way that from your perspective is regular enough for you to depend on it and create a new pattern on top of that, right? Again, that's very perspectival. When you have so you have emergent, but what is emergent and what is fundamental seems to be, again, very perspectival. Depending on your scale, what sensory organs you have, what you are, seems to be, the direction of, like, we tended to think of emergence as just like going up, going from bottom up, but I feel like, why can't it go sideways? I mean, when you look at, creating patterns with color filters on the light is creating something new, and creating a pattern with polarization lenses or what have you is creating another pattern, and those aren't higher one than the other. They're just like different filters that you're putting things through. So how is there a way to think about, maybe is conscious, can we really say that consciousness is special in some way, or is it just sort of a perspectival thing where we, does a proton think of itself as having total free will and thinking through its choices, etc., and when it sees us, it's just like, oh, that's a unthinking inanimate formation of molecules or whatever, that like it's just following some rules, and but we look at it and think the same thing, that's what I suspect. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Really important issue. I was thinking of ants and the way in which, some people who are either they're Jain or they're just like vegan and really don't want to harm any other organism. They won't harm ants, even if they're like infesting their kitchen or something. And, my view of this is that the organism in question and the real, the nexus of consciousness is not an individual ant, but the whole hive or the whole nest. That's the organism here. And so in a way, if there's a lot of ants down your kitchen counter and you clean those ants away and kill them, it's kind of like trimming a bush. Like if you don't dig up the roots, you're not really harming the organism. You're just trimming it back. And so I think when we're talking about where the consciousness of a particular organism is, what's a whole, what's a part, there's a lot of perspective involved. Protons, I think, we have to what extent is a proton an abstraction of some physical model? And to what extent is it an actual self-organizing node of energy that's out there? I think there's something that physics is describing, and photon is a name we give it, but contemporary physics is so model centric and so abstract and mathematical that I don't think we know really what the entities are that we're interacting with that we call proton. But let's just go with it and say there is something like an energy packet that's a proton or a photon or whatever that the standard model of particle physics is describing. That proton probably sees us as a bunch of protons or neutrons and electrons. Like it sees us at that level and interacts with us on that basis, right? So just like we can't, like we look at our sun and think that it's just up there in space where its visible component is. In reality, we're actually inside of the heliosphere and the larger stellar organism that has an extension that we can measure energetically out like way beyond Pluto. And so we're inside of this solar organism, even though to our physical senses it appears that we're outside of it and it's over there. And so we're constantly dealing with these issues of perspective. But we can still think of the way that physical organisms bring forth a standpoint or a perspective. And there's something about the nature of space, and I don't mean geometrical, abstract Euclidean space. I mean lived space, like phenomenological space, the sense in which you feel like you have some kind of here-ness, like you're here, right? And for you, I'm there. For me, you're there. But that sense of living space, the universe is primed for perspectives and standpoints to emerge and complexify, and for space to, in some way, gain the capacity to fold upon itself and to experience itself as a differentiated process. And consciousness it's non-local, but it's also always aware of the world from a perspective, right? And that's true for human beings, and it's true for every other creature in the universe that manifests as a standpoint or perspective on the world. And so, Whitehead's understanding of a universe composed of actual occasions of experience, it's like this network of perspectives on perspectives on perspectives. And he says that the world itself in this way functions as a kind of medium. And so there's a transmission of influences through occasions of experience that our body is organized so as to amplify and to construct through the various sensory modalities that we've evolved, a kind of visual and auditory and tactile. At the end of the day, it's kind of a virtual reality, but it's co-emergent with and deeply embedded with everything in the environment. So it's not just a hallucination. Like there's real interactions taking place with other beings out there. But when you were talking about light reflecting in the way that a mirror is so clear in its capacity to reflect light to preserve the image, nonetheless, every body, every corporeal entity in an environment is reflecting, absorbing and reflecting light in different ways. And I think to understand visual perception, we really have to, and there's research on this that Vervaeke has drawn on, this ecological theory of perception, it's called, by J.J. Gibson. And he talks about, I think the phrase he used was the ambient optical array. And just, there's so many ways that subtle environmental cues get picked up by our visual system that involve just the ambient light and the subtle ways that, even though your body's not a mirror, it's still reflecting light from the environment in a certain way. And we use this ambient light to understand depth in our environment, to understand how to navigate an environment in a way that's way beyond just imagining vision as like a flat retinal like surface that's two-dimensional and then the brain constructs. Like, no, the embedded already in the light that we are receiving is information, if you want, that gives us a sense of depth, right? And so it has to do with, light is bouncing off of everything all the time, and we're unconsciously picking up this information, right? And so, but it's all perspective. It's perspective all the way down in some sense.
And like this, it strikes me as, again, if you kind of take even the standard sort of STEM understanding and sort of like push it to its conclusion, you get stuff like this. It's kind of like, well, of course, every object is composed of, in a sense, everything in its past light cone. You could say, everything that went into making that what it is in some sense, the information is there, or at least the, or there's correlations. I think to be precise, I think you have to say correlations, because information is, I guess by definition, something that's like traveling at the speed of light or what have you, whereas correlations are just sort of a description of, because like the fact that I can walk forward is not only due to the efficient cause of my muscles, et cetera, but it's also just like the fact that there's not a wall there, that is part of that causality that we tend to not think about in our post-European Enlightenment type of thinking. But yeah, I know you said you had to head out soon. Would you have a few minutes to talk about the personal God, or should we save that for another time, you think?
Yeah, I could do 5 or 10 minutes and see how deep we can get into that. Let's go there.
I don't know. Sure.
Scratch the surface.
That's I should have gone to that faster, but anyway, it's just very exciting stuff. So one of the things that intrigued me about Whitehead, of course, is that he went on to discuss presumably some sort of personal God, in the sense of a God that has person-like qualities. And I guess usually my post-European Enlightenment brain just sees sort of more, it's easy to understand in a God that's a sort of principle or a, force of, I guess, like the force of creativity kind of makes sense, which is an important part of Whitehead's thought as well. But can you tell us maybe a bit about how Whitehead sees person-like aspects in God?
Yeah. So he has this, as he refers to it, a dipolar understanding of the divine nature. And he admits right off the bat, look, this is an intellectual exercise, and I'm doing the best I can to push human rationality as far as it'll go in understanding something that's obviously beyond our ability to rationally comprehend. But he has, as one of these two poles, the primordial nature of God, which has more of a cosmological function and is relevant to religion and faith practices and so on, but we shouldn't, he would say, allow our religious emotions to interfere with our attempt to understand God as a cosmological principle, right? And so for him, this is the primordial nature that sort of sets the the possibility space for actualization in the course of the evolution of the universe by functioning as what he calls a lure, a divine eros, to use the Greek term eros, a divine eros that he says holds up to each creature a mirror to reflect to it its own greatness, which is to say, in each actual occasion of experience, every pulsation of actuality, God is there as a sort of whisper to say, hey, if you might want to try this, or you might want to consider this possibility. And each occasion of experience, each creature is free to integrate what the divine lure is, but also to create itself in its own way. And that's what leads to, that's why there's evil in the world, because there's freedom in the world. Human beings have a more something approaching a maximal degree of freedom, but we still have this divine whisper. And the other pole for Whitehead is what he calls the consequent nature of God. And this I would understand more in anthropological terms, but I mean a philosophical anthropology or theological anthropology, where the consequent nature has to do with how the human being is responding to the reality of this divine whisper that's coming from the primordial nature. How do we respond to that? And we have all sorts of religious emotion and inspiration that arises in response to this. And as human beings, we, in some way, need the divine to be personal. And it's not just that the personal nature of God is a function of like psychological projection. That's not what I mean to say. It's rather that we recognize that the universe has produced human beings, right? And so if the universe is person generating, it must in some sense have personality to it from the get-go, right? And so the universe seems to be involved in this process of
so that in like a potential sense, right? I can see how that would be like in the sort of infinite multiverse of potentiality, or what have you, whatever you want to call it. There is some there's at least there's a sort of like mirror image of us, I guess, in a certain sense. And there's also, I guess, another sense in which, like, as a human being, of course the universe is going to look like an inside out human being in a certain sense.
Exactly. It's this old microcosm macrocosm correspondence. The human is the microcosm, and there's a sense in which part of what the primordial nature of God is, one way of understanding it, is as this anthropic principle that's guiding the universe toward the potential for personality and for the intimacy of relationship that becomes possible once the universe has personalized itself, once the universe has, and it could, it's taken billions of years as far as we can tell. God's means of creating is not as Newton imagined, where it's just everything created in its current form all at once a few thousand years ago. It's like, no, there's more creativity, there is more contingency, because if the creation is imbued with creativity, and God is in some sense just as much, in Whitehead's view, a creature of creativity as anything else, right? Then for God to play a creative role in luring the universe toward more intensified forms of personality, there's going to have to be catastrophe occurring, things that slow down that process. What we call evil is the expression of, Whitehead would say, creativity in the wrong season, in the wrong habitat, that undermines the sort of social order that had been established. But the way that God works in the world is such that evil is always overcome by a greater good, because the diversity introduced by evil can't outdo the divine vision of infinite possibility, right? There's always a way to integrate and overcome any evil deed that is done. And so, the personhood of God for Whitehead is what's finding expression at this stage of cosmic evolution, and our intuition of the divine personality is I would say, among the most important driving factors at this point in human evolution, that we need to attune to and cultivate this divine personhood in order to organize ourselves socially in a way that leads away from self-destruction, self-annihilation.
Okay. Yeah. And that's, and that is something that's very, embedded in the cosmos in a sense. Like, or that's one of the ways we experience. Okay. That's one of the ways we experience it. That's great. I wish we had more time. We'll have to talk again sometime and really get into the God stuff, because that's that's the other one of the important parts of the equation here, obviously.
For sure. Hopefully this is a nice taste test, and I'd love to have a follow-up conversation soon. Awesome. if you're available, we can continue to talk more about this.
That'd be fantastic. I don't want to keep you too much. I know you got meetings to go to, so take it easy, and good luck in your endeavors.
Thanks so much, Matt. This was a lot of fun.
All right, great. Likewise.
Tarjuman, jak tu se, tu gosade, show, kalkom pishak, tu gosade, kalkom pishak, tu gosade.